How can a dead girl leave blood at a crime scene? It started with a murder that, at first, didn't stand out. On March 18, 2023, a man named Simon Caro was found dead in an alley behind a diner in Queens, New York. He'd been stabbed once in the stomach, and his body showed signs of a struggle. Bruises on his arms, scratches on his neck, and blood under his fingernails. Caro wasn't new to police. He had a long criminal record: fraud, robbery, and suspected ties to a human trafficking ring that was dismantled a few years back. At first, detectives thought it was just another deal gone wrong. But when the lab processed the evidence found on Caro's body, one thing didn't make sense. The blood under his fingernails didn't belong to anyone in the system, not at first. Then, 2 days later, it pinged a match. The DNA belonged to a woman named Alyssa Rowan, a Syracuse college student who, according to every official record, had been dead for 3 years, and not just legally dead. She had been identified through dental records after a car crash in 2020. Her death certificate had been signed. Her funeral had been held. Her family had buried her in a cemetery not far from their home. So how did her blood end up on a dead man in Queens? At first, investigators thought it had to be a lab mistake. Maybe old evidence got mixed up. Maybe there was a paperwork error. But the sample was fresh, clean, collected directly from the victim, and there was no sign of contamination. Detectives requested a second run. Same result. Alyssa Paige Rowan, born August 7, 1999, died April 2, 2020, or so they thought. Detective Helena Grant was assigned to follow up. Her first stop was the Rowan family home in Syracuse, a quiet house, middle-class neighborhood. Her parents, Thomas and Diane, were polite but visibly uncomfortable when Alyssa's name came up. "She died 3 years ago," her father said. "It was a terrible accident. Her car flipped on a wet road. The police said she was probably dead on impact." Her mother clutched a tissue in her hand. "Why are you asking about her?" Detective Grant explained that a murder investigation had turned up blood that matched Alyssa's DNA. Her parents were confused. Her mother asked if maybe it was a mistake. Her father said, "No, that's impossible. We saw her body, or part of it." But that turned out to be the first crack, because the coroner's report listed the condition of the body as unrecognizable. The ID had been made through dental records only. The crash had caused major trauma. The body was burned. The funeral was closed casket. Nobody had actually seen Alyssa's face after the accident. When Grant looked deeper into the accident scene photos, another detail jumped out. The crash happened late at night, and there had been no witnesses. The car was found alone on the side of a wooded road. The driver's side was crushed, but there was no seatbelt mark on the victim's shoulder, which raised a new question. Was Alyssa even the one driving that night? Grant went back to the crime scene in Queens. She reviewed security footage from the blocks around the alley. One camera caught a blurry figure walking away from the area just minutes after Caro's estimated time of death. It was dark, but the person was slim, fast, and wore a hoodie pulled low. You couldn't see a face, but Grant zoomed in on the hand. There was a mark, a small tattoo near the wrist, a triangle with a line through it. Alyssa had the same tattoo. Her college roommate had mentioned it in an old interview after the crash. She got it after her first year, the girl had said. It was supposed to mean air or something. She was into symbols. That tattoo showed up again, on a different blurry photo taken just 6 weeks before Caro's death. A private security camera from a coffee shop in Astoria had captured a woman sitting alone in the back corner, hoodie up, head down. She only came in on Wednesdays, always ordered the same drink, paid in cash, no name. But when she dropped her sleeve, the tattoo was visible again. Same wrist, same triangle. Grant tracked the IP address from the shop's Wi-Fi log that night. One device had connected, a locked account under the username R0.828. That account led to an Instagram profile with no followers and no posts. But the profile photo was of a young woman standing near the East River at sunset, hair tied back, face shadowed, but zoomed in you could see it. Alyssa's face, same cheekbones, same scar near the lip that her mother had described in the accident report. The account had posted only once, 2 years earlier, then deleted it. But the post was archived, and the caption said, "You only get to die once. Don't waste it." Now police had DNA, video footage, a tattoo, and a possible social media link. But here's where it got worse. They requested the funeral home records from Alyssa's burial. The mortician on duty had left the company a year ago. No contact info. The coroner who signed off on the body, Dr. Frank Hallowell, died 6 months after Alyssa's crash, and the photo used to confirm the dental ID had never been double-checked. One signature, one body, one family that never looked inside the casket. So the question wasn't just how Alyssa's DNA showed up. It was, who was really buried in her place? Once the DNA match was confirmed and the trail led back to Alyssa Rowan, the NYPD had no choice but to do something almost unheard of. They filed a petition to exhume the body of a woman who had already been buried for 3 years. It wasn't just about identifying the victim anymore. This was now a question of identity fraud, forged death records, and possibly something worse. The exhumation was approved within 48 hours. A judge signed off after being shown the DNA evidence from the Caro crime scene and the matching tattoo in the surveillance footage. The Rowan family was informed and reluctantly gave permission. "It's like she's dying all over again," Alyssa's mother said quietly. "But if there's even a chance that she's alive." The grave was opened on a cloudy Tuesday morning. A small team from the medical examiner's office stood by as they lifted the coffin from Plot 219B at Holy River Cemetery. Inside was a sealed body bag, just as expected. The casket had not been tampered with, the locks were intact. But when they opened the bag, the first surprise came quickly. The body inside was much shorter than Alyssa Rowan. Forensic measurements showed a female corpse approximately 5 feet 2 inches. Alyssa had been listed at 5 feet 7 inches. The weight didn't match either. This body was frailer, possibly even malnourished. Decomposition had set in, of course, but the bones told a clearer story than the skin. This wasn't Alyssa Rowan, not even close. The medical examiner halted the re-autopsy and ordered immediate DNA testing. Within 2 days, the results came back. The person buried in Alyssa Rowan's grave was a woman in her early 30s. No dental records on file, no criminal history, and no fingerprint match in any database. She was never identified. No one had ever reported her missing. And yet, for the last 3 years, everyone had believed she was a dead college student. The official death certificate was now considered invalid, which meant Alyssa Rowan was no longer legally dead. She was, in the eyes of the law, a missing person. Again. Investigators shifted their focus to the funeral home that handled Alyssa's burial. It was a family-run business called Fairridge Memorial Services, owned by a man named Colin Reeve and his wife. Detective Helena Grant and her partner visited the office to pull the original intake paperwork from April 2020. Colin handed over the file, but something about him felt rehearsed. Inside the folder were copies of the coroner's autopsy, the certificate of cremation request, later reversed, and a single photo, a burned ID card recovered from the crash site. The photo was charred, the face unrecognizable, but the name was clear: a Rowan. That was what they'd used to confirm the victim's identity. When asked if they'd ever opened the bag or inspected the body themselves, Colin shook his head. "No need," he said. "The coroner sealed it. All official. We just did what the family asked." But later that day, one of the staff members, a young embalmer named Erica, called the station privately. She admitted something strange had happened the day the body arrived. "We were told not to prep the body. just to bury it fast. No embalming, no photos, just seal it and move on. That's not normal for someone so young. Erica also said she remembered seeing a small scar on the body's stomach, a surgery mark. She thought it was odd because the file didn't mention any surgeries in Alyssa's past. Detectives pulled Alyssa's medical records from her college health clinic. No abdominal surgery, no known conditions. But that same scar was listed in the new autopsy of the exhumed body. That proved it once and for all. The body buried wasn't Alyssa's, which meant someone had swapped a corpse into her identity and buried it. But who and why? And how did Alyssa stay hidden for 3 years until Simon Caro's murder forced her back into view? Detective Grant returned to the NYPD archives and began combing through every incident tied to Simon Caro. That's when a small detail in a 2020 case file caught her attention. 3 weeks before Alyssa's supposed crash, Caro had been arrested during a raid on a trafficking operation. Among the seized items, fake passports, identity kits, and several burner phones with connections to upstate New York. One of those phones had a text message that said, "Transfer confirmed. New alias RA, the timestamp, 4 days before Alyssa's accident." Investigators now believed Alyssa had been targeted before her death, either as a victim or as someone willingly trying to disappear. Either way, someone had created a new identity for her, and someone had helped make sure no one ever came looking. That person may have been Simon Caro. If she killed him, it might not have been a random act of violence. It might have been revenge or exposure. But the biggest question remained. Where had she been for 3 years? And how had she managed to live undetected until the murder in Queens pulled her back into reality? The only lead they had was a social media account, locked and inactive, that showed her face. Same scar, same tattoo, and a single line in her bio. "Dead girls don't talk, but I'm tired of being dead." She wasn't just hiding, she was investigating. When the NYPD cyber unit was brought into the case, they started with what little they had: a social media account under the alias RA, a photo taken near the East River, and a Wi-Fi log connecting to a coffee shop in Astoria. They traced the device ID from that single login and found 6 more connections to public Wi-Fi networks across Queens, all logged under the same MAC address, all anonymous. No social media posts, no messages, no emails. Whoever was using that device knew exactly how to stay invisible, but a single mistake broke it open. One night, 6 months before the murder, the user had connected to Wi-Fi at a laundromat in Long Island City, a hotspot that had camera surveillance tied to facial recognition. NYPD pulled the footage. It showed a woman with short hair, wearing a hoodie and surgical mask, waiting for her laundry. She never looked up. But when she removed her jacket to fold her clothes, the tattoo on her wrist, the triangle with a line through it, was visible for a second. Same side, same shape, and another scar along the base of her arm. The same scar mentioned in Alyssa Rowan's pre-2020 medical files after a childhood fall. Now they had a clear timeline. Alyssa hadn't just survived. She had stayed hidden on purpose. She moved like someone trained to vanish. Cash only, no phones, no social trace. But the question remained, why? The cyber unit began tracking cash purchase logs near each hotspot she used. In a nearby thrift store, they found a receipt paid with cash, but logged under a loyalty code. A minor slip, someone using a barcode tied to a burner email, orchidghost828@protonmail.com. That account, when forced open by subpoena, led to something unexpected. Inside were folders, not photos, not personal logs, but files, PDFs, screenshots, clipped news articles, all about missing women, dozens of them. Some names had red underlines, others had handwritten notes. A few were known cases, but many had no national coverage, no open file, just a single line: disappeared, no ID recovered. And at the bottom of every folder, one line: last seen with SC. Simon Caro, the man she killed, the man who'd been linked to human trafficking 5 years earlier, but never convicted. He had skated by with plea deals, flipped on lower associates, vanished from the headlines, until his body was found bleeding in an alley. Detectives now saw Alyssa not just as a fugitive. She may have been something else entirely: a survivor, a witness, maybe even a self-made investigator tracking down a man the system failed to convict. But the pattern went deeper. One file stood out in her folders, a name not connected to Simon Caro, but disturbingly close to Alyssa's own case. A girl named Marina Teal, reported dead in a car crash in 2018 in Connecticut. Same story: closed casket, no surviving photos of the crash, body ID'd by dental records only. But Alyssa had flagged Marina's obituary with a note that said, no high school yearbook photos, no medical records, no social media before 2016. It was the same ghost pattern, like the identity had been dropped out of nowhere, aged up and made real, just long enough to die. When NYPD cross-checked Marina's file, they found that the dentist who confirmed her dental ID had once worked at the same hospital that signed off on Alyssa's. And when they pulled employment records, they discovered something chilling. That dentist had gone missing in 2021, reported missing by his wife, never found. Another ghost. That's when Detective Grant asked the question no one else had said out loud. What if Alyssa isn't the only one who was supposed to vanish? The case shifted again, no longer just a mystery about a girl who returned from the dead. Now it looked like a pattern, a system, a network of disappearing women who weren't just dying. They were being deleted, possibly by the same people, possibly for the same reason. But Alyssa had slipped out. She was the one who got away, and she wasn't running scared. She had been building a case. But then something had gone wrong. Somewhere between those last 3 Wi-Fi pings and Simon Caro's murder, her trail went dark. The burner email stopped logging in. Her devices went silent. No purchases, no laundromat visits. It was as if, after killing Caro, she knew they were closing in on her too. But there was one more thing, a file in the email draft folder. It was never sent, just typed out and saved. A letter addressed to Detective Helena Grant, the same one now hunting her. The subject line: if I disappear again, start here. Inside was a list of 6 names. All girls reported dead, all under 25, all in different states. But each one had a strange connection to burned IDs, sealed autopsy files, or coroners who had since died. Alyssa had been doing the work police never had. But now the question wasn't just whether she was still alive, it was whether someone else wanted her case buried again. Because every girl she had listed had the same thing in common: they were declared dead without being seen. And Alyssa Rowan might have been the only one to come back. Detective Helena Grant stared at the list Alyssa had left behind like it was a confession, a breadcrumb trail, or maybe a trap. 6 names, 6 states, 6 closed files. The kind of deaths that would never have been linked if not for one person who was supposed to be dead herself. Grant handed the list to the interagency task force that had been quietly formed after Alyssa's reappearance and Caro's murder. Their job was simple on paper: verify the burial details for each name, confirm identity with existing documentation, and flag any inconsistencies. But by the end of the first week, they had confirmed that none of the 6 cases were clean. The first name, Marina Teal, had been buried in Connecticut after a fatal rollover crash. Same as Alyssa. The crash was labeled as a result of reckless driving in rainy conditions, and the ID had been made via dental confirmation. When her grave was exhumed, there was no body inside, just a pile of rocks in a sealed bag. No explanation, no tampering, no grave robbing. It had been buried like that, intentionally. The second girl, Eliza Dorn, was found in an alley in Pittsburgh. Death ruled as accidental overdose. No autopsy was performed due to the presence of a used syringe. Her toxicology report was missing from the file. When her casket was opened, there was a body, but it had 2 state-issued IDs tucked into the lining of the coffin, both with different names. One of them matched a real missing persons report from 2 years earlier. The third name, Hannah Quill, had supposedly drowned in a lake in Minnesota, but the coroner listed no water in the lungs. It was assumed she died before entering the water, yet the report was signed off as accidental. When the team tracked down the coroner who handled her case, they found he'd retired 6 months after her death and had gone completely off-grid. No forwarding address, no paper trail. By the time they reached the 4th name, Callie Rowe, who had died in a fire in Georgia, the pattern was undeniable. Closed casket funeral, dental ID, no visual confirmation. The fire report had been signed by an assistant medical examiner, a temp replacement filling in during a sick leave. That examiner never officially worked for the county. Her license had expired 2 years before the death. The photo on her ID had been borrowed from another state's records, someone who had actually died in 2009. It was as if someone had dressed up a dead record and sent it to sign off on a body. Case 5, Selena Hyde, had fallen from a hotel balcony in Chicago. There was no blood spatter on the ground, no fractures consistent with a high fall, and the video footage showed her going onto the balcony, but never jumping. It cut, then resumed with her body already on the ground. When investigators requested the raw feed from the hotel's DVR, the manager said the file had been deleted accidentally 2 weeks after her funeral. No backup existed. The 6th name, Isabel Park, had allegedly taken her own life in a forest near Portland. Her note was typed, no fingerprints on the keyboard. Her shoes were clean, despite her being found in thick mud. The suicide was ruled unquestioned. But her school had received an email from her account a full week after her time of death, withdrawing her from class. And the IP address linked back to a small apartment in Queens, just 4 blocks from where Simon Caro was killed. 6 deaths, 6 stories. But not a single one made sense when placed under pressure. Every single girl had been buried, burned, drowned, erased, with no one truly checking if the facts lined up. And they all had one thing in common. Their files were processed somewhere along the chain by a woman named Sharon Bell, a name that hadn't shown up until the 5th cross-reference. She wasn't listed in the official autopsy reports. She wasn't a medical examiner. But she was a traveling forensic consultant used during overflow moments when cities had too many cases at once, contract only, paid in cash. And she had been quietly present, either on site or listed as a witness, in 5 out of the 6 cases Alyssa named. But there was one massive problem. Sharon Bell didn't exist, or rather, she had no birth certificate, no tax records, no photos on file. Her address listed in a city personnel system was a UPS drop box. The social security number she provided belonged to a woman who died in 1982. Whoever she was, she had built a paper person, and that person had certified the deaths of girls who might never have died at all. The task force began to dig deeper, and it didn't take long to uncover the true scope. Over the last decade, at least 33 young women had been declared dead under similar circumstances. Not all of them were connected directly to Sharon Bell, but more than half were, and others followed the same blueprint. No autopsy photos, closed casket services, and files with missing or altered timestamps. Some graves were found empty, some bodies couldn't be identified at all. But here's the most chilling part. When cross-checked, many of the supposed victims shared eerily similar physical features, same height range, similar eye color, body type, age group. It was as if someone was choosing girls who could be swapped for each other. Someone who knew no one would look twice if one face replaced another. The detectives now faced a horrifying possibility that Alyssa wasn't just lucky to escape. She had been part of something systematic. Something that turned death into a disguise. Something that allowed a network of traffickers or worse to disappear girls by creating fake funerals, faked deaths, and sealing their fates behind real tombstones. But Alyssa had caught on. She had named the girls, she had tracked the patterns, and she had tried to warn someone. But maybe the biggest question still hadn't been asked. What if the person buried in Alyssa's place hadn't been chosen at random? What if that girl, the one in her grave, had tried to escape too? The body that had been buried under Alyssa Rowan's name was no longer just a victim of mistaken identity. She had become the key to something larger, and the task force treated her like a crime scene that had waited 3 years to be discovered. Her autopsy was redone from scratch. This time, every inch was studied. Her bones, her dental structure, the healed fractures, the remnants of surgical procedures. The first revelation came from her left femur. There was evidence of a break, one that had been surgically repaired with a titanium rod and small surgical staples. The make and model of the rod was uncommon and traced to a specific batch issued only to River Point Surgical Hospital in Vermont, a small private facility that specialized in trauma recovery. The hospital had strict intake records. No patient under Alyssa's name had ever been admitted. But when the team requested patient logs from the year before Alyssa's crash, one name had been deleted from the archive. The timestamp showed the deletion occurred exactly 2 days after Alyssa's alleged car accident. The records manager swore the deletion was unintentional, but someone had accessed the internal system using a guest login ID tied to a temporary staffer who had worked there for just 1 week. When they traced the photo ID of that staffer, it turned out to be fake. The photo was a cropped image from a 2009 missing persons flyer. Another ghost ID. Another planted piece in a puzzle that no one could yet see in full. As for the body itself, dental records were a dead end. There were no matches in any system, no dental chart, no reported procedures, no insurance records. Her fingerprints had been chemically burned, likely with acid, but one print remained on her left thumb, partial but clean enough to determine it had belonged to someone never registered in any state or national database. That didn't mean she didn't exist. It meant she had never been documented, possibly taken as a child, possibly raised off the grid, possibly trafficked. But that was just theory until the second revelation surfaced, and this one was more disturbing than the first. On her upper back, near the shoulder blade, was a faded tattoo. It had been partially erased, possibly through skin abrasion or intentional damage, but the remnants showed a shape, a triangle inside a circle, with a line struck diagonally through both. The design matched one that had shown up in several previous cold cases involving missing girls across the country. It wasn't just a symbol, it was a tag, something used by trafficking networks to mark inventory. The FBI had only recently started piecing this together, but a few survivors in past interviews had described the same symbol being used as a form of silent control. Some said it meant taken, others said it meant don't touch. Either way, the girl buried under Alyssa's name had that tag, and it had been burned, scratched, then inked again over scar tissue, as if someone had tried to erase it and someone else had put it back. That made her not just a body, she was a warning, but there was more. During the autopsy, the coroner found something embedded in her forearm, a thin sliver of metal lodged just beneath the skin. It wasn't shrapnel, it was deliberate. A folded microchip, the kind used in pet tracking implants or high-end livestock, never intended for humans. But this chip wasn't broadcasting, it had been deactivated. When extracted and scanned, it contained only one thing, a file directory name. No files, no metadata, just a title. It read, Rowan828_witness. The chip had no brand label, no manufacturing signature, but it had been implanted by someone with surgical training. The incisions were clean. Sutures healed without infection. Whoever did it wasn't a butcher, they were a professional. So the question became chillingly clear. Had this girl been used as a decoy, as a smuggled shell to carry information? Had Alyssa Rowan, or someone working with her, implanted this chip into the girl and sent her into the fire to deliver it from the grave? The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. It was an operation, one designed to hide the truth inside the very system meant to bury it. And the message was embedded not just in what the body showed, but in who she wasn't. She wasn't Alyssa. She wasn't on record. She wasn't supposed to be found. And yet, someone had made sure she would be. The triangle line tattoo, the hidden chip, the erased hospital record, the reused funeral identity, all of it pointed to a conscious, deliberate act of rebellion inside something massive. But rebellion against what? That's when the task force returned to the only known thread that connected Alyssa Rowan and the unknown. Girl in her grave, the man she killed, Simon Caro. His name had been scrawled into one of Alyssa's research folders, but in another folder, labeled Only Eighth Witness, they found something else. A list of funeral homes, all with sealed body transfers, all within a 100-mile radius of Caro's former known residences, all with unverified IDs. The name Farage Memorial, the funeral home that handled Alyssa's burial, was on that list. So were 5 others, but next to one, underlined 3 times in black marker, was a single word: survived. The next lead wasn't in the grave, it was alive. And if that girl, whoever she had been, died carrying that chip, then maybe the person she died for had finally decided to speak. The name wasn't listed, the file didn't say who she was, just a code in Alyssa's folder. Eighth witness, followed by 5 funeral homes and a string of numbers that didn't match any police record. But it wasn't nothing. One of the funeral homes listed in Alyssa's notes, Lockridge and Sons, had processed the body of a girl named Danielle Hart in 2019. Official cause of death: accidental overdose. She was buried in a remote cemetery outside Albany. But when the task force pulled the records, they noticed something that didn't sit right. The name on the body bag tag didn't match the name on the death certificate. One said Danielle Hart, the other said Rebecca L. Haynes. No police investigation had ever been opened. No one had checked the discrepancy. The funeral home manager claimed it was a clerical error. But when they opened Danielle Hart's grave, the body inside had a healed stab wound on her shoulder. One not listed in the report, and that's when they checked the microsurgical staples near the scar. Same exact type used in the unknown girl found in Alyssa's casket. But the DNA didn't match either Danielle Hart or Rebecca Haynes. Instead, it matched a juvenile record from Colorado tied to a runaway named Maya Corin. Maya had been reported missing at age 15. She was never found. She would have been 21 at the time of the staged funeral. And now, 6 years later, someone with that same DNA, slightly aged, had been spotted on a traffic camera in Scranton, Pennsylvania, entering a convenience store late at night. The timestamp was just 9 days ago. The woman in the footage wore a black cap and scarf. She never looked directly at the camera, but when investigators zoomed in, they saw the scar on her shoulder. Same side, same depth. Maya Corin, or whoever she was now, wasn't dead. She had survived. She was the 8th witness. Tracking her wasn't easy. She paid in cash, no bank records, no social media. But she made one mistake. She purchased a bus ticket under a fake name to Boston, and the surveillance photo taken at the terminal showed her face, fully exposed. When the task force traced the bus arrival point, they found a women's shelter that had recently admitted a new client under the name Allison Hales. No ID, no background, but she had listed a prior surgery on her intake form. A metal rod in her left leg, that matched. They approached cautiously. She had no idea who they were at first. Her eyes stayed locked on the exit. She looked like someone who had been chased across too many state lines, but when Detective Grant showed her a photo of Alyssa Rowan, she froze. Not just recognition, fear, then rage, then something deeper, sadness. She didn't say Alyssa's name, she just asked one question. Did they get her too? The shelter director agreed to let the detectives speak with her under full protection and no cameras. Maya, now going by Allison, took a long time to speak. When she did, her voice was quiet, like someone who had practiced silence too long to trust volume anymore. She said she had been taken at 15, promised a job, a room, education. It was a lie. They moved her every few weeks, different homes, different names. Sometimes she was the girl who died. Sometimes she was the sister of the girl who died. The funerals were rehearsed, staged. They'd bring in burned IDs, burned bags. One time, they buried an empty casket and said it was her. She watched it happen, watched her name disappear. She was supposed to vanish, but she didn't, and neither did Alyssa. Maya said she met Alyssa 2 years ago in a safe house in upstate New York. Alyssa had already escaped by then. She was tracking names, looking for others. Maya said she only stayed 2 nights before running again, but Alyssa left her something, a burner phone, a notebook, a list of names, 6 of them. She said if anything ever happened to her, I'd be the only one who knew the real order, Maya whispered. Detective Grant asked what the real order meant. Maya hesitated, then said, "It wasn't about the girls who died. It was about the girls who were supposed to die, but didn't." The list wasn't a record of loss. It was a record of survivors, each one marked for erasure, each one who somehow broke free. Maya said Alyssa believed the network had changed tactics. Instead of killing girls outright, they were faking deaths, assigning new identities, and selling them through channels that no longer needed chains, only silence. You weren't a prisoner. You were a ghost, paperless, untouchable, disposable. That's why they buried them. Not to kill them, but to erase them from every system that could have saved them. And if one ever resurfaced, like Alyssa, they sent someone to clean up, like Simon Caro. Maya said she believed Alyssa killed him because she had no choice. He found her. He threatened to reverse what she had undone. But by then, it was too late. Alyssa had already passed her message on. The folders, the USB, the chip inside the other girl, and Maya. All pieces of a warning that had taken 3 years to surface. Detective Grant asked her why she hadn't come forward sooner. Maya looked at her like the question didn't belong in the world. And then she said the one sentence no one forgot. "Because they bury you so no one hears you scream." The directions Maya gave led them to a rusted row of storage units off Route 17, tucked behind a shuttered motel outside Binghamton. The number was scratched into a key tag, 402B. When they arrived, the unit looked untouched, padlocked, overgrown with weeds. Detective Grant opened it slowly, half expecting it to be empty, a decoy, a dead end. But inside, under a thick canvas tarp, was a single folding table stacked with boxes, folders, and a cheap camcorder duct taped to a crate. There were also 2 suitcases, both sealed. One held clothing, basic toiletries, burned IDs. The other held what looked like a portable evidence archive. Files so detailed, they made the task force's own records feel amateur. Every folder was labeled in red marker, each one with a year, a location, and a name, or what Alyssa believed was the name used. Many of them had death certificates that matched real cases the team had never connected. But Alyssa had gone further. She had collected before and after photos, old social media accounts, driver's license applications, even school enrollment papers, proving that girls who were later declared dead had been using constructed identities for years before their supposed deaths. The camcorder had only one tape. Inside, Alyssa looked straight at the lens, sitting in what appeared to be a motel room. Her face was pale, exhausted, but determined. She spoke slowly. "If you're watching this, I'm either missing again or worse. I need you to understand. This isn't about trafficking. It's not just that. It's about deletion, erasure. They're building a system where no one has to kill you. They just have to make sure no one knows you exist anymore." She named 3 organizations: Everpath, Mercy House, and Homeward Families, all nonprofits, all operating in different states, all claiming to assist women in crisis, runaways, and victims of domestic abuse. Alyssa claimed they were front operations, not all branches, not all staff, just a layer hidden inside, people using the intake pipeline to feed girls into a system that manufactured death records, then funneled them into new identities or worse. It wasn't that every victim was trafficked. Some were used as messengers, some were bait, some were never seen again. Alyssa's voice broke only once, when she said, "I think I was supposed to be one of them. I think the crash was real, but I think someone else was meant to die in my place." That meant she might not have escaped intentionally. She might have been the mistake, a flaw in the system. And once she realized it, she turned on them. The last thing she said before the tape cut, "If I vanish again, check the payments." That's where they all meet. In the bottom of the second suitcase, beneath a false lining, the task force found a small black binder. Inside were handwritten ledgers, columns of dates, initials, and amounts. Some entries were marked with a red triangle, some were labeled clean. And next to one transaction, dated 6 months before her fake funeral, was the name S. Caro. He'd been paid $8,000. The line next to it read, "Transfer complete. R.A. moved. Shell confirmed. R.A. Rowan, Alyssa." Shell confirmed. The decoy body. It meant Caro hadn't just found her after the fact. He'd been involved from the start. But the real shock came on the 3rd page of the ledger. A series of initials tied to repeated payments, always in round numbers, always monthly. One set of initials was familiar. H.G. Detective Helena Grant. Her heart dropped, but it wasn't her. When cross-checked against other documents, the payments were addressed to Howard Grissom, a retired coroner who had once overseen the autopsy verification system in upstate New York. He'd processed 5 of the names on Alyssa's list. Grant realized then what Alyssa meant by "check the payments." These weren't just random actors. This was a system of licensed insiders, coroners, hospital staff, funeral directors, who were all paid in cash to process false paperwork, to stage funerals, to bury the wrong girls or no one at all. Some names were redacted, some amounts were massive. One payment exceeded $40,000 tied to a double switch. Next to it was a word no one had seen before in the files: inheritance. Was this about money? Were some girls being used to launder funds? Fake deaths used to transfer property, disappear legal heirs, or erase debt? The longer they stared at the binder, the more unreal it felt. Not because it was too cinematic, but because it was so bureaucratic. These were spreadsheets, payment logs, clean and consistent. Someone had built this with institutional structure. Grant closed the binder and whispered, "This isn't a trafficking ring. This is an industry." The final page of the ledger had only one sentence, written in Alyssa's handwriting. "They don't just erase girls, they erase the ones who ask why." The task force divided up the names from the ledger with military precision. No announcements, no emails, just encrypted communication and in-person handoffs. They were moving in the dark now, because the moment they opened the black binder, something in the air had changed. It was no longer just about identifying fake deaths or rogue coroners. Now it was about who was still alive and who had something to lose. The first name they pursued was Howard Grissom, the former coroner whose initials matched over a dozen payment logs. He had retired quietly in 2021, never suspected of wrongdoing. When two agents visited his home in Albany, they found the front door unlocked. No response inside. The house was cold. In the basement, Grissom was found slumped at his desk, a cup of coffee still warm beside him, an open folder on the floor. The cause of death? Undetermined. No signs of forced entry, no immediate trauma. But the medical examiner noted traces of phenazepam, a rare, hard-to-trace sedative banned in most states. It didn't take long to realize the folder on the floor was the same kind issued by Mercy House, one of the 3 charities Alyssa had named. Inside was only one sheet of paper, a printed list of 6 names. Every one of them was from Alyssa's list of girls, and handwritten across the top, "They came back." It sent a chill down every spine in the task force. This wasn't cleanup. This was a counter-investigation. Someone else was already reacting. The following morning, one of the agents on the team, Sam Tiernan, found an unmarked envelope on his windshield. No return address. Inside was a photo, his wife walking their dog. On the back, "This is your only warning." The message wasn't loud. It was surgical, controlled. Whoever sent it had access, surveillance, confidence. Tiernan went dark immediately. The unit assigned him full protection, but the message was received. They weren't chasing ghosts anymore. The ghosts were watching them. They restructured everything. No more paper, no digital notes. One-room meetings only, no phones allowed. Grant kept the binder under lock and key, transferring it to an off-site location each night. But even then, paranoia started creeping in. One night, during a late review of the case materials, Grant noticed something off in the logbook. A page had been torn out. The names scheduled for interview that week were now misaligned. Only someone inside the task force had access, which meant someone inside the team might not be clean. They began vetting each other in secret. Background checks, financials, cross-referencing family histories with names from the binder. That's when they found the first connection. One of the task force members, Agent Drew Myers, had a sister who'd gone missing in 2014. Her name, Katie Myers. Cause of death, presumed drowning. Recovered body, unconfirmed. Closed casket, filed by a local coroner who had processed 3 other names from Alyssa's list. Myers had never spoken of it, not once. When confronted, he said he didn't know. He thought his sister's case was unrelated. But when they reopened her records, they discovered the same triangular tattoo Alyssa had flagged, etched faintly on Katie's inner thigh, the symbol of the network. It shook the team. Was Myers here to help? Or had he been sent in because they knew someone like him would do anything to find out what really happened to his sister and would follow every breadcrumb, even if it led him to the people who buried her? The uncertainty was fracturing the team. Everyone was on edge. But the investigation pushed forward. One more name from the binder, Lucille Hart, former intake coordinator at Everpath's Ohio office, was still active, now working at a new foundation under a different name. The team set up surveillance. She moved like someone who thought she was invisible, but they noticed something strange. She made regular visits to a retirement home every Friday, always the same room. A patient listed as L. Halberd, diagnosed with late-stage dementia. But when the team reviewed old photos of the man, they discovered something shocking. He had once been the founder of a now-defunct nonprofit called Horizon Bloom, one of the first rescue networks for at-risk youth shut down for lack of oversight in 2002. The man had vanished from public records years ago, until now. Lucille was still reporting to someone, maybe even the one who started it all. It was becoming clear. This wasn't just about bodies. It was about infrastructure, a system built years ago, allowed to operate under the radar, using fake deaths to erase liabilities, repackage lives, and bury the truth under law and charity. Now the task force was caught in the teeth of it, watching it close around them, and one terrifying question remained, scribbled in the margins of Alyssa's notebook. now burned into the team's memory. If they can fake your death, what else can they fake? The insider finally spoke. But Alyssa wasn't the first. She went by the name Margot Lane now. But 10 years ago, she had been listed as a shift manager at a Mercy House facility outside Buffalo under her real name, Janine Elster. She was one of the few names in Alyssa's notes that hadn't yet disappeared, relocated, or turned up dead. The task force moved carefully. She was found working nights at a diner under the name Margot, living in a crumbling rental 2 towns over. No family, no digital footprint, no bank account. When they approached her in person, she froze, not in confusion, but in expectation. She didn't ask who they were. She just said, "It's not over, is it?" That was enough. They took her into protective custody under the radar. No arrests, no charges, just questions. And for 2 hours, she said nothing, just stared ahead, until Detective Grant showed her the photo of the girl buried in Alyssa's grave. At that, Janine's expression cracked. She whispered, "I thought they burned that whole line." The words hit like a flare in the dark. Slowly, over the next 4 hours, she opened up, not because she trusted them, but because she knew the network already knew she was a liability. She confirmed almost everything Alyssa had suspected. The charity programs were a filter. They pulled in runaway girls, those without stable families, and quietly funneled a select few through a second intake system. The girls were given new names, new papers, sometimes even medical work, braces removed, surgeries conducted, scars erased or added. Then, once the system had enough of a paper trail to pass as real, the girl would die. Usually in accidents, car crashes, overdoses, drownings. The bodies used were often from morgues, Jane does that no one claimed, or in some cases girls already lost to the system. Their bodies became shells. The real girl vanished, and what happened next depended on who had paid. Janine said some girls were used to launder assets, others to vanish on behalf of someone powerful. "You're not just vanishing," she explained. "You're becoming useful to someone who needs a person with no past." But then she leaned forward and dropped the real twist. Alyssa wasn't the first girl to figure it out. In 2012, a girl named Hannah Voss had uncovered a similar ledger and had tried to turn it over to the authorities. Janine said she helped Hannah sneak it out of a safe house and had personally mailed it to a police station in New Jersey. But it never arrived. 2 days later, Hannah was gone. Janine never saw her again. Her funeral took place a week later. Closed casket, no photos, signed off by a coroner named, Janine choked when she said it, Howard Grissom. The same man from the ledger, the same man who died just days ago. Grant asked why Janine stayed quiet for so long. Her answer was simple. Because they bury anyone who talks, and the ones who don't get buried get used. Janine claimed the network had tiers. The girls at the bottom never saw the big picture. They were moved, erased, reassigned. The ones in the middle, staff like her, were paid to comply, to look away, to handle logistics. But the real power sat at the top in what she called the clean room. A group of silent funders and architects, people who never signed anything, never showed up in files, but whose instructions moved everything behind the curtain. She'd only seen one of them once, a man who arrived during a double switch in 2015. No name, no ID, just walked through the hall, nodded once, and vanished. The next day, 2 girls were gone, one buried, one flown out on a private plane. That was the last week Janine ever worked for Mercy House. She quit after that, went underground, changed her name, assumed she'd be found eventually. When Alyssa resurfaced, Janine knew the system had cracked again, and something big was coming. Grant asked if Janine knew where any of the funders were now. She shook her head. "They don't live where you look. They live in boardrooms, in the signatures you don't see." Before ending the interview, Janine scribbled one name on a scrap of paper. Elsbeth Voss. She looked at Grant and said, "That was Hannah's sister. If anyone still knows the truth, it's her, but I don't think she wants to remember it." And that's when the real horror sank in. If Hannah had tried to expose the network 10 years ago and failed, and Alyssa had tried again and ended up in hiding, what exactly would happen now with the task force trying to go public? Because the truth wasn't just dangerous, it had already buried the girls who spoke it. Elsbeth Voss had not opened her front door for 6 years. Not to family, not to mail carriers, not to the city inspectors who'd filed citations for overgrown hedges and blacked-out windows. When Detective Grant arrived at the quiet, dead-end street in rural Vermont, the woman who opened the door was pale, expressionless, and surrounded by bolts, not just on the door but the walls, cabinets, and floors. "You don't sit," Elsbeth said. "You listen, then you leave." She spoke in short commands, every word rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times. In her living room, surrounded by rusted filing cabinets and blackout curtains, sat a small fireproof safe. She said it had belonged to her sister Hannah, left to her a week before Hannah's supposed suicide. But she'd never had the courage to open it until now. When she finally turned the key, the click echoed louder than it should have. Inside was no manifesto, just a VHS tape, a handwritten letter in Hannah's looping cursive, and a laminated photograph. The letter was brief. Hannah wrote, "If they find me gone, it's not because I gave up. It's because I got too close. Keep this until someone comes asking. Someone always does." The photograph was of a girl, brown hair, almond eyes, 17 maybe, smiling slightly. In the corner, someone had written in red marker, AR number 3. The initials didn't match Hannah. They didn't match any name in Alyssa's files, but the tape did. They used an old VHS player Elsbeth had dusted off from the attic. The screen fuzzed, then stabilized. What followed was a static-ridden video of a group of girls standing in line, outdoors, backs to the camera. A voice, male, off-screen, was instructing someone, "Tag them according to medicals. Start with the Rowan set." At that moment, one of the girls turned her face toward the lens. And there she was, Alyssa Rowan, or someone who looked exactly like her. Same building, same hair, same cheekbone scar. But when Grant paused the tape and compared the girl's face to the one on Alyssa's official ID, something didn't match. The teeth. The girl in the video had a tiny chip on her front incisor. The real Alyssa's dental records showed no such damage. The girl in the video had different teeth. That meant one horrifying thing. The real Alyssa might never have existed, or at least not alone, the Rowan line. That's what the voice had said. Start with the Rowan set, as if Rowan was a template, a mold, a batch. Elsbeth turned to Grant and asked quietly, "How many do you think there were?" Grant didn't answer. She couldn't, but it changed everything. What if the girl who resurfaced, the one whose DNA showed up at the crime scene, wasn't Alyssa returning? What if she was one of several, trained, embedded, and then set loose when someone pulled the right string? The entire investigation had been based on the premise that there was one Alyssa Rowan, a girl who escaped a staged death and tried to take down the people who orchestrated it. But what if that girl had been created, or worse, replaced? The USB drives, the chip, the hidden storage locker, the buried girl, the surviving witnesses, all of it might have been designed not just as evidence, but as a signal, a reactivation. What if Alyssa's true role hadn't been to expose the system, but to test whether it could be exposed at all? When Grant returned to headquarters, she had the photo scanned. Facial recognition results came back in hours. No matches. Not even to Alyssa herself. But one result triggered an alert from a private intelligence firm in Virginia. The image had been flagged before. Not publicly. Internally. It was part of a closed training document used by a psychological operations contractor. The girl's face had been used to train AI systems for identity layering. teaching machines to create synthetic profiles that could pass as real. The project had been shut down in 2014, but the face remained in their database, and it was labeled not as a person, but as a baseline asset. The realization hit like concrete. The girl buried in the grave, the girl who reappeared, the girl in the video. They might all be different versions of the same file. Alyssa Rowan wasn't a girl, she was a storyboard. A name assigned to a series of constructed lives used and discarded depending on what the network needed. And this final iteration, the one who killed Simon Caro, was likely the last piece of that story. She wasn't exposing the network, she was the network, breaking itself open to see what would happen next. A test of how much could surface before someone shut it down. Elsbeth handed Grant one last thing. A slip of paper found folded inside the VHS sleeve. It had only 2 lines written in Hannah's handwriting. She's not coming back. She was never one person. They're watching who watches. The investigation was closed a month later. Officially, Alyssa Rowan remained deceased. The murder of Simon Caro was ruled self-defense. The ledger disappeared. Witnesses retracted statements. And one by one, the girls who had survived went quiet again. But the story didn't die. It lived in the edges, in sealed boxes, in grainy videos, and in the silent, watching face of a girl who never blinked. Because some identities aren't erased, they're replicated.